Hey, good morning to anyone who's out there and joining me. Glad to have you here this morning. And I want to talk this morning. If you saw in the thumbnail, uh, it was a picture of me biting my nails. And so I want to talk this morning about habits. And unfortunately, nail biting is one of my bad habits. And seeing it in front of me shows me just how gross it looks and reminds me that it's a terrible habit and it's something that I should not do. But we all have habits, and we all have things that we tend to do. Some of them good, some of them bad. Um, but I think it's important to remember that we are what we do, and we are what we do in life. We are what we do repeatedly. We are what we do habitually. And I think that's something where we tend not to like the idea of labels in our society today. But I think part of the reason for that is that it's a little too on point, that sometimes it's because they provide a little bit too much accountability, and we're just not okay with that. Good morning, Estella. You know, if I repeatedly eat too much, then I'm a glutton. If I repeatedly drink too much, then I'm an alcoholic. If I view pornography, then I'm a pornographer. If I steal, then I'm a thief. I am kind of the sum of what it is that I do in life. Now, the good news is that we can change what we do and that labels don't have to be permanent, that with God's help, that we can be redeemed and we can make changes. But that also requires a little bit of knowledge. Um, Good morning, Ann. Good morning, Marilyn. It's good to see you guys this morning. In a University of Duke researcher back in 2006 found that more than 40% of our actions that we take each day are habits. They're not decisions that we're actively making. They're just things that seem to naturally happen. You're a coffee addict, huh, Stella? I know many of those. But so much of what we do as part of our life, nearly half of what we do is done out of habit. Now, that's a very important thing. Habits are absolutely critical because our brains cannot focus on all of the things that we do each day. It would overwhelm us. It would exhaust us. And so the beauty of habits, and really I believe why God created habits, is because we can take things that we do, oftentimes very complex things, and they can become very simple because it's a learned behavior. Habits are really just kind of like burned neurological pathways in our brains. Now, that doesn't mean that habits are good or habits are bad. Habits are just a matter of, it's something where we have learned a response to something that occurs. If we didn't have habits, we would be paralyzed by everything that happened to us all day. I have a 16-year-old daughter, and she's learning to drive right now. And it reminds me, as I sit in the car with her while she's learning to drive, how much driving is a habit. And as you see, she's just getting started, and as she struggles with little things like, oh, right, I have to remember to put on my turn signal, or, oh, right, this is the way that I make this turn, or, just all the things that come up while you're driving. She went for her longest drive Thursday night on the way home from band practice, and it was about 35 minutes, and she was fretting a little bit because it stressed her out. Well, driving doesn't stress me out. I mean, I'm driving and I'm listening to something, or I can talk to somebody on the phone, or I'm thinking about something else. But it's because of how much of that has become habit that driving is no big deal to me. But it's a huge deal to a 16-year-old who's never done it before. Habits are stored in a part of our brain, and this is really interesting to me. And sorry, I tend to really like geeky things, but habits are stored in our basal ganglia, which is a section that's kind of down in the middle, kind of deep within our brains. And what's really interesting here is they've done studies on people who have suffered damage to their brains, and they found that the habits remain even when the outside of the brain is damaged. So there was a man named Eugene Pauly who, in 1993, he lost all of his short-term memory due to a bout of viral encephalitis. And what they found was he couldn't remember anything about his his house, where he lived, where the food was. And if you would ask him questions, he would say, I don't know. But he would just tend to get up and go for walks around his neighborhood and wind up at his house again. Or you would ask him where the food was kept and he didn't know, but he would be able to just get up and go into the kitchen and make food. And as they studied this man, Eugene Pauly, what they found was if they would change things about his routine, if there was construction being done on the block, it would mess him up and it would mess up his habits. And neighbors would have to help guide him back to his house. You know, if you would put obstacles in his way, it would mess up his habits. But they found that our habits are stored so down deeply inside of us, that even if the outside of your brain is damaged, that you're able to achieve the goal of the habit. You know, there's this phrase that old habits die hard. Well, that's not actually true. Old habits don't die at all. Habits can't be removed, from what researchers tell us. They have to be replaced. So if you have a habit that kind of never will go away, but you can overcome it. Habits are based off of a cue, a routine, and a reward. And that's true for good habits, and it's true for bad habits as well. There's something that happens that cues the habit. If you're nervous, you bite your nails. Or, you know, if you're tired, you get some coffee. And then there's a reward that happens at the end. You know, maybe biting your nails reduces stress. Maybe drinking some coffee causes that jolt of caffeine to make you not feel as tired. But all habits are based off of that idea of cue, routine, reward, cue, routine, reward. And what they found is, you know, the cue, sometimes you can change your life so that the cue goes away. But oftentimes that cue will reemerge, and that's when those old habits continue to come back. So what you need to do is, you can't really change the cue in many cases, but you can change the routine. And what you found is, if you can become cognizant of these habits, you know, well, I'm tired. You know, if you're trying to get off coffee, I'm tired, but I'm not going to have coffee. Instead, I'm going to go exercise. I'm going to change the routine that comes after the cue. But then you need to be able to find a reward that comes so that you continue to engage in that habit. That's cool, Stella, that your daughter is studying neuroscience. I really enjoy studying the brain. I've got a bunch of audiobooks about this. But going back to the habits, our habits are most malleable when the golden rule of habit change is applied, where we use the same cue and we also get a reward, but we replace that routine. But in order for our habits to stay changed, we have to, first of all, believe that we can change. And many times we have to involve the help of others in order to make changes. So that often includes support groups or accountability partners. That's why, you know, you'll find when people suffer with alcoholism or drug addiction, that they will go to a place like NA or AA, or they'll have to have an accountability partner. Oftentimes we need others to help spur changes in our habits. There's this idea in Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit, and I put in the chat the two books that I use kind of as references for this. The shorter book, if you're interested in this topic, is Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's much more accessible. It's about half the length of the second book, which is The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. Atomic Habits is a lot more about kind of the individual, what we can do to make changes in our habits. And it actually references The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. It was written after The Power of Habit. The Power of Habit has a lot more lengthy stories about how habits have changed people's lives and the studies that have been done on habits. But one of the things that Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit, talks about is the idea of keystone habits, and how there are small things that you can do that tend to impact other things in great ways. For example, exercise. When people start exercising and they found this in studies, even as little as once a week, they often tend to, and even unknowingly, change other habits. For example, eating better. They become more productive at work. They'll smoke less. They'll show more patience with colleagues and with family. They'll use their credit cards less frequently, and they'll say that they feel less stressed. So one atomic habit is exercise. Another atomic habit is families who eat together. Families who eat together tend to raise children that have better homework skills, produce higher grades, have greater emotional control, have more confidence. Making your bed every morning is another atomic habit. It's often correlated with higher productivity, with a greater sense of well-being, and with stronger skills at sticking with a budget. One example of an atomic habit that Charles Duhigg talks about in his book is how Paul O'Neill, who you might remember him, he was a Treasury Secretary under George W. Bush for a couple of years. Well, Paul O'Neill was at one point the head of a very large company that many people haven't heard of, Alcoa. Alcoa is a metal producer, specifically aluminum, but they produce other types of metals too, I believe. And when Paul O'Neill took over at Alcoa, everyone was expecting the same CEO speech that they always got about how we're gonna drive profits, and we hate regulation, and we're gonna, here's how we're gonna turn the company around. And Paul O'Neill, in his first speech when he took over the company, completely shocked everyone in the room when his speech focused on safety. And he said, "We are going to be a safe company. My goal is that we're going to be a company where we never have a safety incident ever." Now, obviously, that's not something that's achievable, but it was the goal that he was striving for. And it goes through in this book how safety became this keystone habit of Alcoa, and how it dramatically changed the culture at Alcoa to the point where people started rethinking the way that they were doing business, that the structures and kind of the power structures in the company began to crumble under this idea of, hey, we're going to change safety. If there's something that's unsafe, I want to know about it. And Paul O'Neill gave out his phone number to all of the grunt employees and said, if you see something that's unsafe, if your manager is unwilling to deal with it, call me at home and let's have a conversation. And he demanded that all of his managers started to take safety seriously. And if there was ever a safety incident, he needed to be notified about it. And just how this radically changed the culture at Alcoa, to the point where even one of his high-level managers at one point hid a safety incident, and everyone in the company was shocked because this man was fired because he withheld this. And safety became one of the keystone habits at Alcoa. This book also talks through Michael Phelps, and how as a young kid, he was kind of full of energy, and his parents were going through a divorce. And so he ended up getting involved in swimming. And he kind of, I think he was about 8 years old when he got involved with swimming. And his swimming coach started using visualization as a keystone habit for him of, Michael, you need to visualize being in the pool, and visualize the water dripping off your face, and visualize doing all of your strokes properly. And it went through the story of Michael Phelps, and how, obviously an Olympic swimmer, I believe he has the most gold medals of any Olympian ever. And how this habit of visualization in Michael Phelps' life so greatly impacted things that at one point in one of his races, water ended up in his goggles, and he was swimming completely blind because, obviously couldn't see through the water. And he was visualizing going through in his strokes and how far he thought the wall would be. And he guessed it perfectly based upon the way he had visualized the race. And he pulls himself out of the water and pulls his goggles off, and he sees that he had just set a world record for the fastest run ever while he was swimming blind. Keystone habits can make tremendous changes in your life if you kind of pick some of these important things that you want to do, and kind of put them at the core of what you do day in and day out. The important thing to remember about keystone habits is that these actions don't necessarily cause the outcomes, but they do start chain reactions that cause us to adopt other good habits and to have those take hold in our lives. The one verse I want to reference here, James 4:17 says, remember that it is sin to know what you ought to do and then not do it. So many times it becomes so easy in our lives to know that, oh, well, I should do that. I should really exercise. I really should eat better, and to not do it. Is that sin? Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe, maybe not. James would seem to suggest that it is. But so many times in our life, we know what we ought to do, and it would be so easy to do it. But because we tend to be lazy, every one of us tends to be. And really, that's the whole reason that we develop habits in the first place, is because, small things become difficult for us. Because we tend to be lazy, we don't do the little things right. And we don't focus on the little things. Let me give you an example. You ever sit and watch a TV program because the remote isn't next to you and you don't feel like getting up and walking across the room to get the remote? Or it's just too much effort to change the channel? Or, well, I should really get the mail, but I don't feel like it. Or I know I need to make that phone call, but I just don't feel like it right now. So many times in our life, these are things that are really not all that difficult, but we just tend to be lazy and we tend to not do them. Do the small things in your life. So much of our lives are determined by our willpower and our self-discipline. There was a study by the University of Pennsylvania back in 2005 where they measured IQ and willpower. And what they found was that students with a higher degree of willpower earned better grades, they got into better schools, they had fewer absences, they watched less TV, and they did more homework. What they found was that self-discipline was a better predictor of academic performance than IQ was. But here's the thing, self-discipline is like a muscle. It can grow and it can be fatigued. But self-discipline can also be turned into a habit. Many of us have probably heard about the Walter Mischel 1972 marshmallow experiment, where they put marshmallows and other like pieces of candy in front of young children at I believe the ages of like 3, 4, and 5. And what they would tell them was, you can have this now, or if you wait a few minutes, you can have a second one. And what they found was that the people with the children with greater self-control, they came back to them later in life and found that they tended to be more successful in their lives because they were better at controlling their urges. They were better at controlling themselves. And they started to see all of those types of things where they would do better in school. They would do more homework. They would avoid bad temptations. So what we need to do in life is that we need to turn self-control into a habit. We need to say, kind of the same way with driving, how you have all those tiny little actions that you take, of making turns and turning on a turn signal and accelerating properly and braking properly. Those all become habit. When we practice self-control, when we practice, no, I'm not going to eat that thing that I know I shouldn't eat. No, I'm not going to go and get that extra serving of food when I know I don't need to have it. No, I'm not going to have that drink that I know I shouldn't have, or have that second drink or third drink. No, I'm not going to look at that on my television or on my computer when I know it's wrong. The more that we practice those little habits, the more we turn self-control into a habit, and the easier it becomes, to the point where self-control becomes almost effortless in certain situations. One of the things that's talked about in The Atomic Habits by James Clear is that in order for something to become a habit, we need to make it obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying. And those are kind of the 4 keys. Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying. And the more that we can do those things with something that we need to do, the more that we can turn something into a habit. If we set out exercise clothing, then we've made it obvious that we need to exercise in the morning. If we find a way to make exercise more attractive, for example, if we're going to exercise with a friend, or in my case, I run on a treadmill. I have a show or one of a few shows that I will watch while I exercise. Well, that makes the idea of exercise more attractive. If we can make the task easier, or if we can make it satisfying, if we can reward ourselves in a certain way after the task. Hey, you know what? If I go and I complete my run, then I'm allowed to do this. But if I don't complete it, I'm not allowed to do this. Um, the more that we can hit those 4 points, make it obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying, the more that we can instill good habits in ourselves. And the way that you break bad habits is the opposite of that. The more that we can hide something, the more that we can make something unattractive, the more that we can make something difficult or dissatisfying, the easier it becomes to break bad habits. One of the things James Clear talks about in his book is the importance of small incremental changes. If we can get 1% better each day, then over the course of a year, imagine how much you improve. If you can get 1% better each week, if you think about the idea of weight gain or weight loss, part of the reasons that weight gain is so easy is because, putting on a pound is about 3,600 extra calories. So if you end up with about, 300 extra calories a day, and 300 calories is not hard to get to. 300 calories is a couple of sodas. Over the course of 12 days, you've just added a pound of weight. And over the course of 120 days, that's a third of a year, you've just added 10 pounds of weight. You can gain weight so easily, and it feels like taking it off is so difficult. Well, if you can cut 300 calories a day over the course of 12 days, you're going to lose a pound. Over the course of 120 days, you're going to lose 10 pounds. It's these small kind of incremental changes that we have to make. Another one of the suggestions that he has in his book is, never stop making improvements. If you miss, never miss twice in a row. If you're trying to instill an exercise schedule and you're sick or something comes up and you miss one day is not bad. When you miss the second time, that's when it becomes a problem. Because when I miss the second time, then it becomes easier to miss the third time. One of the things he emphasizes, and this is kind of counterintuitive, is, even if you do something poorly, it's better than not doing it at all. So even if, I slept terribly last night, I got 4 hours of sleep, I'm so exhausted, even a bad run is better than no run. And that's counterintuitive to me because I always want to push myself and I always want to do better. But even doing something badly, because it ingrains that idea of I'm going to do this on a regular basis, I'm going to make it a habit. And our habits have compounding effects in our lives, just like I think Albert Einstein was the one, I'm not positive, who said that the greatest force known to mankind is compounding interest. Well, compounding habits can make tremendous changes in your life. One of the things James Clear said, and I quote from his book, is, "It's remarkable the business you can build if you don't stop working, the body you can build if you don't stop training, the knowledge you can build if you don't stop learning, the fortune you can build if you don't stop saving, the friendships you can build if you don't stop caring." So, Estella, I saw your thing on vision boards. I'm not familiar with vision boards. I can kind of imagine what it might be, but I'm going to have to research that. But the idea of keeping an idea ahead of you and keeping a goal ahead of you, however you do that, I think is critical. Some more things, and I'm sorry, this is going on really long. I probably should have made this like 2 or 3. I'll be done soon. But some of the keys to building better habits are: make a specific plan for how you're going to make the change. The Power of Habits talked about, or The Power of Habit talked about patients with hip surgery and how important it is to get moving after hip surgery. And what they found was those who would write out specific plans for how they were going to start their recovery, they started walking almost twice as fast. They were in and out of chairs 3 times, by themselves without help, almost 3 times as fast as people who did not write out specific plans. So make specific plans for how you're going to make the changes that you need to make in your life. Keep daily records of what you do. What they found was people who were trying to lose weight, people who kept daily food records of everything that they ate, they lost weight twice as much, or twice as fast as everyone else who were involved in those studies. Um, so many times documenting makes you aware of things that you otherwise would not be aware of. And I think that's kind of maybe where you're going with that question, Estella, about vision boards. Keeping goals in front of you. And I'm not a big goal setter, um, but so many times, whether it's a plan that you're going to have, a specific plan, and very specific, not, well, to lose weight, I'm going to exercise. No, I'm going to exercise on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and I'm going to do it at 8 a.m. And the way I'm going to do it is by walking at least a mile or whatever it is, but coming up with very specific plans or having detailed records. If you're having a problem with money, keeping track of every single penny of what you're spending, every single one, and not spending anything without writing it down. And this isn't something you have to necessarily do for the rest of your life, but until you get a habit under control, detailed records, because then you'll start to see things and you'll see trends in what you're doing or what you're not doing that that impact your life. Accountability or commitment devices. Telling somebody about, hey, I'm having this problem, I've got this bad habit, and saying, I need you to hold me accountable. I need to talk to you every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. I'm going to call you and we're going to talk about how I'm doing with this, with this habit, with this good habit or with this bad habit that I'm trying to deal with. Commitment devices. I find that for me, if I have a phone call that I don't want to make because I know it's going to be uncomfortable, it's easy to just keep putting off that phone call. Well, what's a commitment device? A commitment device is something that forces your hand. For example, if I have to make a phone call that I don't want to make, I'll text the person and say, hey, I need to have a conversation with you. Can we talk? Well, now I can't weasel out of that conversation because once I've sent that text, I can't take it back. Now the person knows we're going to have a conversation. So a commitment device is something that has now forced my hand. Or once you've told somebody about a habit that you're struggling with and told them that you need them to hold you accountable, that's a commitment device because now somebody knows about that. Now somebody can, it's no longer a secret. It's now in the open and someone can hold you accountable for that. The last piece of advice I'll give is do the little things well. There's this kind of obscure passage in Song of Solomon, and this is something that my mom used to quote to me when I was a little kid. The passage doesn't really provide a whole lot of context, but it's Song of Solomon 2:15, and it says, catch for us the foxes, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards, our vineyards that are in bloom. And it's this whole idea of life is so much about little things, tiny, tiny little things. These little things that we do, watching a child learn to walk, they have to learn so many little things to do right in order to get that right. Learning to drive, there are so many little things that you have to do right. And so much of our lives are these little things that we have to do and that we have to do well. And if we start doing them, and if we start to find these atomic habits, these small things like exercise or making our beds or focusing on safety, or here's one, how about entering into a relationship with God on a regular basis, about reading the Bible? If we can find these little cues that can get us set up in our life, the YouVersion Bible app is great for this. Every day I get a reminder, hey, you're supposed to read the Bible today. Okay, great. And I'm going to bring it out and I'm going to read a scripture. And maybe it's only a few seconds that I read, but it's that constant prompting of you need to get into God's word. So whatever it is, all these little things, doing lots of little things well, causes a compounding effect in our lives and causes big things to come into focus. One more verse I want to reference, and then I'll pray and we'll be done here. 1 Corinthians 9:24-27, Paul's talking and he says, this is actually right on the tail end of the passage that Bub was talking about on Sunday, but Paul says, do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. I love that passage, but specifically the idea of In another translation, I don't remember which one, I buffet my body and I make it my slave. Can we force ourselves to do the right things? Can we force ourselves to do all the little things that we need to do and watch the positive compounding effect? And maybe in your life, that's a physical thing, maybe it's a mental thing, maybe it's a financial thing. In many cases for our lives, this should be a spiritual thing. Can we do the little things right? Can we build habits? Can we make them attractive to us? Can we take that idea of that cue, response, reward, and can we feed that into our lives so that we can make massive changes over time in our lives and so that we can turn our lives into what we need them to be? So, okay, I'm sorry, I've rambled on way too long. I'll try not to go this long in the future, but let me pray and ask God to help us with our habits. Father God, I thank you for the powerful way that you have set up our bodies and how we can take extremely complex things and do them almost effortlessly. Lord, but that's a double-edged sword, and that comes with the ability to do great things easily, but also to do terrible things to ourselves easily. And with the power of sin in this world, so many times we find ourselves victims of bad habits. Lord, help us not to let the little foxes spoil the vines in our lives. Help us to pay attention to the details, to the little things. Help us to come up with specific plans for how we're going to change the things that are wrong in our lives. Lord, convict us of the areas where we're wrong in our lives. Help us to find accountability partners. Help us to commit to making changes. Lord, help us to do everything that we need to do in order to live our lives for you, Lord, so that you can be glorified in our bodies, in our minds, in our spirits. Lord, help us to live for you, to shine a light to this world that desperately needs to know that you love them. And Lord, just help us to be the best people that we can be and to reach a world for you. Lord, help our country as we continue to struggle with this pandemic. Lord, help all of those. There are a number of people in the church who are recovering or need healing. And Lord, I lift up all those situations to you. And Lord, just help us as we go about our days. Help us to look at every little thing and to think of it the way that you would think of it. Lord, help us to remember that to do something, to not do something that we know we ought to do, that to us it's sin. And Lord, help us to avoid that in our lives. And Lord, we give you this day right now in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, sorry for making this take so long. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and we will see you tomorrow on the live stream. Take care.